Everyone knows Batman comics are celebrated for hosting one of the most infamous rogues galleries ever put to paper, with the likes of the Riddler and Two-Face being household names. But did you know that Batman's greatest enemy was once the Iranian ambassador? Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most important Batman comics, and most important comics period, of all time. That is, of course, Jim Starlin and Aparo's 1988 A Death in the Family. As you can see, I read this from the 2011 paperback print, which you can still purchase at most local comic shops or online for pretty cheap. In modern pop culture, the legacy of this comic is essentially just Jason Todd's death.
No.
I mean, Jason's entire character nowadays is basically that he died once and he's still pissy about it. Yeah, sorry Red Hood fans, like him or not, this is just true to how he's been written for the past 2 decades, since being revived in 2004's Under the Red Hood. Speaking of which, the 2010 adaptation of that movie is phenomenal, not just because it improves on the comic its name is borrowed from, but because it basically omits all of the story from A Death in the Family and just boils it down to its essentials for the flashback scene of Jason's big bombshell moment. In fact, every adaptation of Jason's death on screen seems to drastically change the circumstances from the comics. And even the comic that started all this and brought Jason back from the dead barely makes mention of the original plot of Death in the Family. This begs the question, why? Well, if you haven't actually read the book, some of you may be shocked to learn that this famous story that has drastically changed the direction of Batman comics forever actually kinda sucks. This is the type of story that starts off swinging right away, as the first page leads with this. Okay, so I know that Batman comics, especially in the late 80s and early 90s, are always a lot darker than other characters, but it is crazy bold to start your comic immediately with him fighting CP peddlers. To me, this doesn't read as something that is dark but essential to the plot, but more as the author just yelling in your face.
This ain't your grandma's Batman book, son. In this story, Batman fights child rapists. And,
Now, to the author's credit, this opening scene does showcase Jason's recklessness and violence, as he goes too far, according to Batman, and brutalizes the gang members. The issue I have here, though, is the scene isn't showing that Jason is especially brutal to these criminals because they're harming kids. It's showing that he's just always kind of like that. This scene could have had them fighting any type of criminal and have Jason react the same exact way. But the authors just chose to invoke the horrors of child abuse because they need to let us know that this book is for adults only, brother! And if you don't like it, you can go back to some kiddish shit like Archie! This is not just a problem with this comic, though. As in the late 80s and 90s, the comic industry was going through a bit of an identity crisis. No, not that one. That's for another video. The 70s and 80s saw DC getting their asses kicked by the rise of Marvel Comics, notably with titles like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and in the 80s, the X-Men being the most popular. These stories were so popular with people because, unlike DC Comics, Marvel characters were more based in reality and tackled real-world issues, sometimes gracefully, sometimes, not. DC, on the other hand, was having their characters fight big monkeys. But after the success of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, executives at DC realized that their readers were craving a new type of story. What if DC was for big boys? The problem here is that as the industry moved through the decade, authors wanted to further relate stories to real-world politics. Comics like X-Men did this beautifully. Comics like Batman, well, no, my stance is not politics in comics bad. This is a stupid take that misogynists and racists online use to complain about a movie, video game, or comic daring to have a diverse cast of characters.
I just peed in my basement. No, not in the kitty litter. Just in the drain.
Politics in comics, good. But when the politics of the time are...
It's crack, rock cocaine.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages.
Hundreds of Iranians finally overran the embassy compound, seizing about 90 people, mostly American.
And the author, Jim Starlin, is not very well known for his political grounded stories. Well, you get a lot of racist stereotypes and Joker reverting to Islam. I don't want this to be an anti-Jim Starlin video. He's written many classic stories. He's also the co-creator of some fantastic characters like Thanos, Gamora, and Shang-Chi. Yeah, okay, so the dude clearly has a problem writing POC. Let's talk about the story. In Death in the Family, Jason finds out that his mother, once believed to be dead, is still alive, and is one of 3 mystery candidates in the Middle East. So, he and Bruce go on a wacky misadventure full of hijinks and action in war-torn Lebanon and Ethiopia to find Jason's long-lost mother in order to fill the mommy-sized hole in his heart. Along the way, they encounter whole gangs of Islamophobic stereotypes. Batman helps out the CIA and endorses American imperialism, and of course, they track down the Joker, who is trying to sell nuclear bombs and medical supplies to a Shiite terrorist cell. Eventually, Jason reunites with his mother, but unfortunately for her and Jason, she's been blackmailed by none other than the Joker and is being forced to help him steal medical supplies from refugees in Ethiopia and replace them with laughing gas. Ingenious. Soon after, Jason finds all of this out, and this is when he's kidnapped by the Joker, beaten with a crowbar, and left to die with his mother and a ticking bomb in a warehouse, while Batman races to the rescue. But the story pauses here, giving the readers of the time a choice. Let Robin live, or let him die. This was a pretty genius marketing move for DC, as this right here turned this otherwise boring and frankly stupid story arc into a must-read event. Now, you all obviously know how this vote ended, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that Jason Todd was always supposed to die, and DC rigged the vote in favor of him dying. However, I can't find any evidence that this actually happened. While event comics with characters dying are a pretty big gimmick that do indeed skyrocket sales, with the death and immediate revival of Miss Marvel and the Amazing Spider-Man as the most recent example, I'm not so sure that DC was really banking on Robin's death as a huge event issue. According to this uncharacteristically helpful article from the always credible and never clickbaity CBR.com, comic book legend Mark Waid, who was an editor at DC at the time of publishing A Death in the Family, claimed that the votes were not falsified by DC. Further, according to Batman author Denny O'Neil in an interview with The Beat, the vote was as close as 5,343 to 5,271, with Robin's dead, rotting carcass closely in the lead. So a big lesson for DC. Comic book fans are depraved little gremlins who want to see a child die horrifically. They definitely won't capitalize on this finding later. As the 3rd issue of the arc rolled around and the votes had been tallied up, Batman finds Jason's mangled body amongst the rubble in a now iconic panel. This is the moment we all remember. The tragic end to Jason Todd that has remained in fans' minds for decades. But the story continues.
Meanwhile, in the deep dark lair of the Ayatollah,
the Joker sells his stolen medical supplies to Iranian terrorists and has a meeting with the Ayatollah of Iran himself, who has quite an interesting offer for him. Back in the States, a grieving Batman has intel that the Joker might attack the UN, but Superman arrives to tell him that they have a new ambassador who has diplomatic immunity. And this, of course, is none other than the Joker.
I should have terminated his vile existence years ago, but I didn't. I couldn't. His insanity gained him a stay of execution, but no longer. He's become too dangerous, his crimes too heinous. Jason's dead.
Joker goes on to give a dastardly speech at the UN, where he compares himself to Iran because they both are insane and love fish. Okay. And follows this up by spraying Joker gas all over the place. But Superman is luckily here to save the day by breathing in all that stinky green gas. And Batman punches Joker a bit, and that's it. That's the end of the arc. The now famous story, A Death in the Family, ends with whatever the fuck that was. The truth is, Death in the Family is just full of uncomfortable and dated Reagan-era racism and odd acknowledgments of serious geopolitical issues of the time without the author doing any further research or analysis to tie it into the story coherently. To add to that, the pulpy nature of Jason and Bruce's globe-trotting quest and Joker's plot to become ambassador of Iran does not mesh well at all with the somber and ultra-depressing story of Jason's violent tendencies and eventual untimely death. The whole thing reads like most of this era's Batman stories, tonally incoherent and try-hard edgy. In fact, I think the only reason this book is remembered today as a good story is because of Under the Red Hood. The 2004 story not only brought back the character of Jason Todd, but retroactively made him actually interesting. If you want a better Jason Todd story, my suggestion is read Under the Red Hood. If you do want to read this book, Just keep in mind that unless you want to see the Joker getting involved in controversial geopolitics of the 1980s, it may not live up to your expectations. To close out with a reminder that this is not an anti-Jim Starlin video, I'll leave you with a quote from Jim Starlin in an interview from 2007 that I found on a blog called 20th Century Danny Boy. I know, I'm really finding the most credible sources for this video, right? Well, I always thought that the whole idea of a kid's sidekick was sheer insanity. So when I started writing Batman, I immediately started lobbying to kill off Robin. At one point, DC had this AIDS book they wanted to do. They sent around memos to everybody saying, what character do you think we should, have them get AIDS and do this dramatic thing? And they never ended up doing this project. I kept sending them things saying, oh, do Robin. And Denny O'Neil said, we can't kill Robin off. Then Denny one night got this flash that, hey, if we get this number where people call in and they can vote on it, they can decide whether Robin lives or dies. So that's how it started. Yeah, all right, this is an anti-Jim Starlin video.